Well, hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. And if you're tuning in at Thursday at 1:30 Eastern, it's time for Take 5 with Steven Travers. And you know well enough about Steven and his books that he's written and the people that he's met over the past year or so that we've been doing interviews that he can handle this all by himself. But I'm glad to be along today because we are going to talk to Steven about one of the books. He's written over 30. One of the books that I'm most intrigued with, it's the history of the Oakland Raiders. It's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. The heart-pounding, jaw-dropping, gut-wrenching moments from Oakland Raiders history. I want to make sure that I add all of that. So instead of getting at just the good, the bad, the ugly, like the song, we get to do a lot more than that. So Steven, first and foremost, welcome to the show. Thank you. I know you could do this by yourself. This is not going to be an interview. We're just going to kind of be two guys sitting on a couch kind of talking about the project itself and the really cool things that became a part of your involvement with this. First and foremost, welcome to the show. And how did you decide to pick this topic here today to talk just about the Raiders?
Thanks, Harper. Well, we've had a lot of guests on this show, and I enjoy guests. We've had some really good ones. And but I had some shows where I've just wanted to talk about a particular subject who is usually somebody or a team or a subject that I've written a book about. Tom Seaver, for instance, I devoted an entire segment to basically two books that I wrote about Tom Seaver and the 1969 Mets. We've devoted an entire show to a screenplay that I wrote that almost became a movie called The Lost Battalion, and then how James Woods may or may not have made an offer to turn that into a movie, and then we found out that it wasn't James Woods, and we don't know whether it was AI. The point is, we've done this a few times, and I thought this being the middle of football season, which is really getting off to a good start, we'll talk about the Oakland Raiders. And it's really the Oakland and Los Angeles Raiders. The book was written before they became the Las Vegas Raiders. So that's not really the subject. The subject is about, and they were my team. Why did I write it? Two reasons. One, they were absolutely my team. I grew up in the Bay Area. The Raiders were my team. I would go to Raiders games, listen to Bill King describe them on the radio, watch them on television. And they won, and they won, and they won. They won division championships every year. I suffered with them losing championship games. They finally pushed through, won a Super Bowl, and they won a couple more Super Bowls. And so that was my team. And so I had written a number of books, Barry Bonds, Baseball Superman, and several USC history books, mainly for Taylor Trade, which is a division of Rowman and Littlefield, major publishing house owned by my friend Rick Reinhardt, who really changed my career. And at some point around 2007, I said, let's move beyond USC. What do you want to do? And he goes, let's do the Raiders. He's just flat out, let's do the Raiders. Okay, let's do the Oakland Raiders, Los Angeles Raiders. I've been there, I've seen them, I've covered them. And so that was the book that I wrote, which came out in 2008, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Oakland Raiders.
Well, a lot of the history of the National Football League can be dated back to the Chicago Bears and the New York Giants and some of the other organizations that were a part of it. The Philadelphia Eagles, of course, have been around forever. When the AFL comes into existence, and since then, you've had the Chiefs, the Dolphins, Baltimore, New York again in some respects. Obviously, you can throw the 49ers and absolutely the Pittsburgh Steelers in there as part of foundational NFL franchises. And of course, especially in the last 25 years, you can't go without saying anything about the New England Patriots. But the Raiders have been there through mostly all of it. There's a couple of teams and a couple of times where they've really struggled. But especially in the late 60s, the 70s, even through the 80s, they were a pivotal part of the National Football League history and the AFL continuation into the NFL. And what an amazing project to go through. And some of the names that we are going to mention here are household names, because deep into the playoffs, these are guys that people on the air were talking about, and then off the air, they were water cooler entertainment, right? Did you see what Cliff Branch did? Did you see that Bolitnikov kid? What do you think of Stabler and Banaszak? And I'm mentioning just a few of the many that were all a part. That Matuzak, he's something else. Did you see the steam coming from Otis Sistrunk's head during that Monday night game? There are so many things that are a part of the Raider folklore. So when you get the project, it's a part of your history. It's one of your favorite teams. But when you start doing some digging, what was that like for you to confirm that this happened? And it happened. Oh, I thought it happened on a different date. And wait a second, that was Madden. That wasn't so. So talk a little bit about some of the really neat observations and aha moments that you had while you're compilating and putting things in order and trying to assemble this.
Well, the early part of the Raider history was what I was not that familiar with. I knew that they were founded in 1960, but I wasn't, and I knew Al Davis, of course, was, the owner, managing general partner, former coach of the team, as well as commissioner of the AFL. But I really didn't know that much about the merger in 1966, how it came about, what some of the intricacies of it were, how the team came about in their first year, how did they get Davis, where they played their early games, because I had grown up with, the silver and black, playing at the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum in front of 54,000 fans a game. Their broadcaster, their play-by-play man was Bill King. As good a play-by-play man as has ever been known in sports, baseball, basketball, and football.
And a real homer, too. He loved the team, and it was our Raiders, wasn't it? He made a neutrality type of broadcast into a, no, we're not doing it that way. This is our team, and it's us against everybody else. Bill was fantastic at that.
Yes, because he was an employee of the Oakland Raiders. Many play-by-play men are employees of the radio station or the television network or cable network that carries the games. That was not going to work with Al Davis. Al Davis, an employee of the Raiders or an announcer for the Raiders, was going to be his employee, and he was going to do it the way Al Davis wanted him to do it, which is not to say that Al Davis made Bill King do anything that he didn't want to do. I never came across that. We talked to Ken Korak on this show some months back. He wrote a great book about Bill King because he was his partner with the Oakland A's when they did baseball. And so Bill King, a homer, I don't know if I would quite use that word. I think he rooted for the Raiders. There's no question they were his team. He wanted them to win. But he was an absolute professional. There's no question about that. And he saw what was going on, and he described it beautifully. And he was a Renaissance man who obviously loved sports, but he spoke Russian. He loved the opera and the ballet, and he was. And I got to know Bill King, and it was a real pleasure. He left us in 2005, far too early. He was in the middle of his announcing career with the A's, but my gosh, what an announcer, a radio announcer too, like you just couldn't believe. The things he said, the descriptions it brings chills to me.
His articulation, of course, and so many other things that he was able to do. Was he with the club when they first started? Was that in the 1960 season that he began, or was that a little bit later?
It was later. In 1960, he was already a well-known play-by-play man, certainly in the Bay Area. He had started off in the Armed Forces radio network in Guam. He told me his whole story once. We sitting down in the bullpen at the Oakland Coliseum, giving me a sit-down interview. It was magnificent. He started in Guam with the Armed Forces Radio Network. He said he was the Robin Williams of Guam, or he didn't not Robin Williams, the character that Robin Williams, the Adrian Cronauer.
Adrian Cronauer, yeah,
yes. Yeah. Good morning, Vietnam, and I could just hear Bill King going, good morning, Guam. So he started doing that. Then he was from the Midwest. He came to the Bay Area as part of this migration of people to California, to the West after World War II. Wanted to get into the radio business, and he became the play-by-play man of the University of California basketball team, which won a national championship, defeating Jerry West of all teams in 1959. And he was also the football play-by-play man for the Cal Bears when they went to the Rose Bowl in 1959. So, and he was one of the original announcers of the San Francisco Giants. So he was doing football, baseball, and basketball right from the beginning. But he was not, I don't know when he was picked up. It was not until after Al Davis had come to the team in 1963. So it was probably around 64 or 65, which is roughly when the Giants probably made a move, or maybe Bill, I don't know for sure. Bill was so busy with so many different teams. He's doing college football, Major League Baseball, pro football. He was probably doing too much, so he probably had to drop something. And it was probably the Giants, because they had Lon Simmons and Russ Hodges, and I think Bill Thompson became the third announcer. And so he dropped the Giants, and this is when he became more available to go to the Raiders. And, Bill King, Al Davis also would not have wanted an announcer who in September and October had to do baseball games, because he would have wanted someone who's completely available just to do football from the preseason on, because if you're a Raider, you are a Raider, and that's really it.
It's funny you say that. I know a couple of guys that played for the team, and they wear more Raider gear than anything else ever, even if it's just one game, 1 year, a couple of years. The way the organization has, because it's won, it's got its Super Bowls, and they've been to the playoffs on numerous occasions. The way that they take care of their own is really unique. Other teams do as well, not all. So it is above average in terms of the standard and the way they do that. But that expression, more so with Oakland, with now the Vegas Raiders, than some of the other clubs, really is, it bodes true. Once a Raider, always a Raider, even if you go to another team. And many guys had come from other teams. But let's go back to the beginning. I remember when we've had Ken Herrick on, and Ken was one of the first Raiders. It was a tight end out of West Virginia. He ended up becoming a scout. He was a coach for a year or two. He went back to scouting and general managing and all of that. But he had the black helmet with the white stripe, and it had your number on the side. He almost looked like a black and white version of what Alabama and Penn State used to do. Talk a little bit about the early days, the organization, and some of the troubles that not only the league, but specifically the Oakland Raiders were having, getting people to come into the seats and to stay there or to come back. It was not a storied franchise when it first began, was it?
It was a franchise. It was a fly-by-night organization that was lucky if it was going to exist for a couple of years in a league that really wasn't for sure. But going back, you were talking about players who think of themselves as Raiders. Just 2 weeks ago, we had Pat Harlow on this show, and Pat, came out of USC. He was drafted and played for the New England Patriots, and he played a few years for the Raiders. And you could tell just by talking to Pat, that's the team he associated himself with. Al Davis was the guy that he most admired. He talked very admiringly of Al Davis. But it wasn't Al Davis who got the team started, and we'll get into Al Davis later. Remember, there was the All-American Football Conference, which came about after World War II. And for various reasons, the conference did not succeed, mainly because the NFL incorporated it, because as jet aircraft came into being, the NFL was now expanding to California. And so there was the Los Angeles Raiders the Los Angeles Rams, who had come from Cleveland. They'd been the Cleveland Rams, and that's where those helmets come from. And then there was the original California professional team, other than minor league teams, that being the San Francisco 49ers. Those teams were incorporated into the National Football League around 1951 or 52. And so the old AAFC disbanded. But by 1959, the United States was, fully migrated to the West. And you had Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Diego, cities like that, and were growing and had huge populations. The attendance at college games in California was tremendous. The Trojans were drawing 100,000 at Los Angeles Coliseum. 49ers were drawing well. Cal had a good team, was drawing well. And also cities like Phoenix were growing cities. The Southwest of America was growing as the Highway Transportation Act came into being. So all of these factors were playing into a new population out west, and let's have a league. And you had this group of people known as the Millionaires Club that got together and said, let's form a league. Let's call it the American Football League. And the main guy who was their driving force was Lamar Hunt, who was an oil billionaire out of Texas. And so this league was formed. And getting to the Raiders are intertwined with the Minnesota Vikings and the city of Minnesota, because Minnesota was going to be one of the 8 original teams. And Minnesota was a market that a lot of pro leagues were looking at. The Washington Senators were about to move to Minnesota and become the Twins. And the National Football League wanted the Minnesota market. And so when the Minnesota team was brought into the AFL, the National Football League immediately did something similar to what they had done with the All-American Football Conference, which is to sort of poach the best teams or the best cities. They said, we're going to have an expansion, and we're going to have two new cities. Minnesota, we're going to call them the Vikings, and Dallas, we're going to call them the Cowboys. Well, Dallas was it was a punch to the gut of Lamar Hunt, because his team was the Dallas Texans. So now all of a sudden you have you have 2 teams. So getting back to the Raiders, Minnesota is out, but there's a team in Los Angeles called the Chargers. And they were actually called the Chargers not because of the idea of electricity, but because they were owned by Baron Hilton, the grandfather of this young lady who was in all those reality shows, Paris Hilton. Yeah. That was her grandfather, and he had a charge card. So that was the idea of a charger. Nowadays, they've incorporated it to be electricity, but it wasn't that. Well, the Chargers were out there by themselves, and they didn't have another rival team even close to them at the time. I mean, the nearest would be Kansas City or somebody like that. Denver. And so, let's put a team in somewhere near them. Could have been San Diego, but they decide Oakland. There's a group out there. Of course, now they're going to compete against the 49ers, but they put a team in Oakland. And so they had an ownership group. And literally, they did not, the day of the draft, they didn't have a coach. They didn't have a draft. They didn't have a number of players that they had chosen who were going to be in their draft. They didn't have a name. They didn't have a stadium. They didn't have a front office. They were basically a team on paper, almost, a napkin paper. And of course, their performance the first year, when I think they were 1-12, I believe, or 1-11, something like that, matched, their planning. There was no planning. They played originally at Kezar Stadium in San Francisco, and they weren't even called the Raiders at the beginning. One of the people who had helped bring the team out was a councilman in Oakland who had gone to Texas Tech, and they are known as the Red Raiders. And he said, "Oh, that's a great name for the team. Let's call it the Red Raiders." I said, "Well, let's forget about red, but we'll make them the Raiders." Oakland is kind of a seafaring Jack London town. A lot of sea captains have lived there over the years. Raiders is kind of a pirate sea captain vibe. That makes a little bit of sense. So they opened up at Kezar Stadium in San Francisco, and they did everything they could to sell tickets. And in fact, what they actually did was give tickets away. I mean, they had promotions. If you buy $10 of groceries at some grocery store, you get a Raider ticket. And then eventually they moved to a place called Ewell Field. And Ewell Field was named after an undertaker, and it is located essentially next to Laney College on what is now the 880 freeway between Berkeley and Oakland, on your way to the Oakland Coliseum, really. Nowadays, it is a parking structure, but it was basically a high school field in Oakland, named after an undertaker. So the team played there. But they did have two good players. They had Billy Cannon, who was a tight end and a Heisman Trophy winner out of Louisiana State. How they managed to get him was, no, I'm sorry, they didn't have Billy Cannon. Billy Cannon he got there later. He was with the Houston Oilers. He had been signed by Bud Adams under the goalpost after like the Sugar Bowl. But they did have the player I'm thinking of is Jim Otto, 00, a center out of the University of Miami. I don't think he was a highly sought after collegian, but he quickly materialized into a very good pro. And he was really their only sort of original star player. So the team struggled through 1960, 61, 62. And in fact, the team was ready to fold. And the owner of the Boston Patriots, who played at Fenway Park, came to the Raiders and bought part of the Raiders. It was a secret deal. It was not publicized. And he bought them because they needed the team to succeed, for the league to succeed, for the Oakland market to succeed, so that there would be, like I say, a natural rival of the Chargers, who after their first year in Los Angeles moved to San Diego and started playing at Balboa Park in San Diego. So that was one of the reasons that the owner of the Patriots, whose name escapes me right now, the original owner, it wasn't Mr. Kraft, that was much later. But that's what kept the team going until the pivotal moment, which is before the 1963 season, when it is decided that they're going to get Al Davis to become their coach.
Al ended up coming from the University of Southern California. Obviously, your ties there. When I met him back in the mid 80s, I called him coach. He looked right at me. He was a football coach that ended up as a funny thing. The managing general partner kind of means I can do a little bit of everything. Mm-hmm. I'm not just restricted to owner, but I'm going to be a part of this process, the ownership that he took in that. And obviously the conflict with Pete Rozelle and so many other things. We'll get into those a little bit later. But the condition was pretty bad there, wasn't it? The team was about ready to leave, and Al recognized something about, one, the location, and two, the future of the AFL. What is, in your mind's eye, what did he see that made this a good venture for him to invest into?
Simple: power. They were
Okay.
willing to give him power. He insisted on basically being a part owner of the team, even though he didn't really have much money. I don't think he invested any of his own money, but he was given that status of managing general partner, which made him an equal with the ownership group. He was now the head coach. He was the general manager, so he was in charge of all the trades and all the drafting. Nothing was going to happen without Al Davis, and this was insisted upon. And he had some power through the reinventions of Al Davis throughout his life. He comes from Brooklyn. He goes to the Citadel, where he wasn't the ball boy or the towel boy, but he was more than that. But he wasn't a coach. He was an assistant, a student assistant. Let's call it that. Maybe doing some statistics, maybe keeping statistics, but not really a coach. But when the yearbook comes out and the yearbook photo guy shows up, he arranges in the picture to be wearing a coach's jacket, and he's positioned with the coaches, and he's named in the yearbook as Davis Al, assistant coach. So he somehow managed to do this, and then they actually make him an assistant coach. And the first thing he does is break NCAA rules of recruiting. So he gets called onto the carpet by the provost of the school, General Mark Clark, who, by the way, had liberated Rome in 1944. He was a huge war hero. And Al Davis admired Mark Clark, and in fact, that's why his son Mark is named Mark. It was after Mark Clark. And General Clark says, what are you doing? This is the Citadel. You're recruiting as if we're, Michigan or Notre Dame or something. And he says, well, don't you want to win? He goes, not at all costs. And he goes, well, you had to win at all costs. And in 1944, he goes, well, that's where I was up against the Wehrmacht, not Army or Navy. So he gets fired. He immediately manages to talk his way onto the staff at the University of Southern California under the proviso that the two players that he had illegally brought to the Citadel, putting them under NCAA investigation, that those two players transfer with him to USC. He gets onto the staff at USC. They now look for a coach after the 59 season, and they hire John McKay. McKay retains the entire staff with the exception of one person, that being Al Davis, because McKay knew that Al Davis was really into power and would be looking to undermine him so that he could become the head coach. But Davis lands an incredible job, which is an assistant under Sid Gilman at the same stadium in the same city, the Los Angeles Chargers, playing at the LA Coliseum. They've got a quarterback who's really good. His name is Jack Kemp. And Gilman creates this wide open offense that really, is really what the league is known for wide open aerial offensive football. And Davis he didn't create this. It was Gilman's brainchild, but Davis was a quick study. And he studied it and he learned it. And within a short period of time, he knew as much about it as Gilman. And when the head coaching job comes up in Oakland, they hire him. But they're thinking, well, he's going to be happy to be a head coach. This young guy comes in with his ducktail and his outfit and his accent. No, I'm not just going to be the head coach. I'm going to be a managing general partner, which means I'm going to be part of the ownership group. That means that I'm going to be making you a lot of money because we're going to draw and we're going to do well, and the league is going to do well, and I'm going to profit from that. That's the first thing he does. No one is going to question me. I'm going to do all the hiring. I'm going to do all the drafting, all the trading. And oh, by the way, we're not going to be wearing those Texas Tech red colors anymore. We're going to be wearing silver and black. And we're going to have a helmet with a pirate with an eye patch. All of this is Al Davis. It's all his brainchild. He comes to the team in 1963.
Yeah, the crest, the logo, whatever you want to call it, the crossing swords, the eye patch, as you mentioned, the colors. I mean, he really took on all of that for the organization's sake. So he had to believe in it, but he had to coach as well. And then he didn't have a team that was very successful, but things started to change. The draft was different. Was Biletnikoff really the first guy that was a mainstay player? You said that Jim Otto was already there. I'm trying to think of some of the other guys that were the earliest of the Raiders, and the originality of crossing the line and going to HBCUs and getting players that the NFL didn't want. I think Kansas City did a better job initially of doing that. Buck Buchanan, Curly Culp, Willie Lanier, Fred Hacksaw, Atkinson. Excuse me. There were so many of them.
Fred Williamson,
please forgive me. I'm sorry.
Favorite all-time players.
Yeah, he's a fantastic player. Yeah, Hall of Famer, of course. And I'm just saying that I think that Hank Stram and the Chiefs put guys on the field, and they started to win earlier, but the Raiders were right there with them from a competitive standpoint. The Oilers won 2 championships, if I'm not mistaken. The Chargers were very good. There was some really good football going on, and then obviously Kansas City culminated by winning Super Bowl 4. But they were also another franchise that was really, really good. So the type of football may have been wide open offensively, but there were some great players that got a chance to shine.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, within a very short period of time, it was obvious that the league was good. In 1962, the Dallas Texans had played the Houston Oilers for the championship, and the game was – they had managed to get a contract with NBC, and they got Kurt Gowdy to be the announcer. This is a huge event for the AFL because Kurt Gowdy was a great announcer with a lot of panache. And the game went into like double overtime, and it was won by the Texans, and had great ratings. And so people started watching the AFL. But getting back to the Cowboys moving in, the Cowboys moved the Dallas Texans out of Dallas, so they became the Kansas City Chiefs shortly thereafter. And you mentioned Fred the Hammer Williamson. I once was invited to an Academy Awards after party in full tux, and I was seated at the table with Fred the Hammer Williamson. And the whole night talking football with Fred the Hammer Williamson, my date looking bored while I'm, going on and on about, putting the hammer to the Green Bay Packers, and then who knocked you out of the game, and how well did you know Jim Brown, all these Hollywood stories. But that's another story. We're talking about the Oakland Raiders and Al Davis. So you mentioned HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, and early players. One of them was Clem Daniels, who was one of those early black pioneers. He was a great running back, and they did have a very good quarterback. And he was, speaking of a team that, certainly broke barriers in terms of ethnic minorities. They had a Mexican-American quarterback named Tom Flores out of Clovis, California. He hadn't been a huge recruit or a huge college star, but Davis liked him and molded him. So in 1963, playing at Ewell Field, the team goes 10-4 and immediately is a big hit in San Francisco. I mean, we're in the San Francisco Bay Area. The 49ers were not good, and the Raiders were quickly outdrawing what the 49ers were doing at Kezar Stadium. And then on top of that, as Davis was building upon this championship team, this winning team, they build a stadium. And this puts Oakland on the map. In 1965, 66, they build the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum, a state-of-the-art facility. The Oakland A's would never have been in Oakland if it hadn't been for Al Davis, who created that stadium. And this, of course, gives the Raiders a home. And, they sold that place out season after season for, 10, 15 years in a row, it seems. That opened around 1965 or 66, but it was also around this time that Al Davis was making some changes in the way he was operating and the way the league was operating.
Yeah, it's an amazing transition, Steven, if you think about it, within just a couple of years, how both the Raiders and the A's, who played in the same building, were winning deep into the playoffs. And the A's, of course, the swinging A's, end up winning 3 world championships in the early 70s. The Raiders had to wait a little while, 75, 76 seasons, for them to be able to get there, but they were relevant. And that's the part that I think is interesting. But going back to the 60s, you mentioned Tom Flores, for example, getting George Blanda to come over from Houston. Al had an ability to see just the skeleton of the player. What have you got? What can you do? He wanted really big linemen to take on the size of the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's still a part of the Raider mantra even today. He wanted speed at the outside receivers. He wanted to go deep at least 3 times a ball game. There were certain criteria that he demanded. And he started to build a really competitive organization because he stuck to his guns. Not always the right decision, not always the most appreciated by others around, but you have to admit that this guy knew what he wanted and he was focused on getting it done.
Yes. And he also knew that the league had to succeed in order for his team to succeed. He saw the big picture. So this is when, in 1965-66, he actually leaves the Raiders and becomes commissioner of the American Football League. And he does this because he knows that there's going to be a merger of the 2 leagues. And he wants to do this in such a way that it will be most beneficial to his own team, the Raiders. I mean, he's the commissioner of the AFL, but he's still the owner of the Oakland Raiders.
Do me a favor. Did he want there to be a interconnection between both leagues, or did he know? You said he was aware of some things. For him to get the timing of getting that job, obviously, and the ramifications of that between the contracts and the money that would come in from television revenue, which was nothing compared to what it is today, but it was better than what they had without it. So talk a little bit about the business aspect of what Al was doing and how, yes, he saw that the whole league as one needed to be together, and even though one team was going to be a champion, everybody needed to be on board and going in the same direction for this thing to float.
His original idea was the AFL would exist on its own and would simply be a superior league. That was his first idea and goal. And this had come about because the AFL was succeeding and they were making a lot of money, and it was the 1960s and America was awash in economic progress and prosperity. Television was an enormous hit. It was, and now it was color television, and sports on television was tremendous. Also, it was a big hit on radio. The New York Jets had signed Joe Willie Namath out of Alabama for $400,000, which was an unheard of amount of money in 1964-65. And the reason they gave him so much money is they literally wanted this guy to make so much money that people would come to the stadium because I want to see someone who's good enough to make $400,000. If there's someone who's that good, I want to pay the ticket to go see him play. So the league was succeeding. So his original idea was to keep the league separate from the AFL. Now, what was going on was there was a lot of finagling behind his back, and this is where a lot of Al's animosities originated from. His animosity against Pete Rozelle, some of his animosity towards Lamar Hunt, and the incredible rivalry that developed between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Oakland Raiders and other owners. He becomes this renegade figure because he's negotiating on one hand, and the league and some of the league's owners are negotiating on the other hand with Rozelle to create a merger. And it all is done largely behind Davis's back. Davis did an excellent job as commissioner in terms of TV revenue, TV contracts, many things that were done to improve the league. A lot of the teams were moving into new and better stadiums during this time. Obviously, the Raiders were at the Oakland Coliseum. The Chargers were moving into San Diego Stadium. The Jets had recently opened Shea Stadium. Chiefs were still playing at Kansas City Memorial Stadium, but I think around 1967, the decision was made to open up Arrowhead Stadium, and other stadiums. Foxborough Stadium would come along, and all these old stadiums that the original league played in, which were some of them were high school stadiums. The Oilers played in a high school stadium. Balboa Stadium in San Diego was a high school stadium. Obviously, the Coliseum in Los Angeles was not, but that was too large a stadium for a team that really only drew 20,000 fans. 20,000 fans at the LA Coliseum is just doesn't look good. But getting back to Davis, the league merged prior to the 66 season, and it was done behind Davis's back. And the idea was there would be a championship game between the American Football League title winner and the NFL title winner beginning in January of 1967, and it would be called the NFL championship game. They would do this 67, 66, 67, 68. They would do this 4 years, and then in 1970, the entire league would be connected, and it would be still called the National Football League, but with two conferences, one being the American Football Conference, the other being the National Football Conference. And the 2 or 3 NFL teams had to move from the NFL to the AFC, and they ended up succeeding beautifully in doing so. Those being the Pittsburgh Steelers, the Baltimore Colts. I think that's it. I think there were only 2. Maybe there was another one. I'm not sure right off the top of my head. But so the 66 season plays out, and Davis leaves his position as commissioner of the AFL, which no longer is a really big time. They don't need a commissioner anymore because it's all under one umbrella. That his job is taken away from him, so he returns to the Raiders. And in 1967, he really gets his revenge on a lot of teams, certainly in his own league. The Chiefs had won in 66, but were badly beaten by the Packers in the Super Bowl. But in 1967, the Raiders have really built themselves into a championship team, largely because of Davis. He finds a quarterback who was sitting on the bench in Buffalo, or when he did play, he was inconsistent. His name's Darryl LaMonica. Brings him over to Oakland, and he becomes the Mad Bomber. They find players like Warren Wells and Gene Upshaw and other players from black colleges. They find a guy named Ben Davidson, who was this monster out of, I think, the University of Washington, everyone, said, oh, he was actually considered too big and too gangly, but Davis's feeling was the Chiefs have Buck Buchanan. We need Ben Davidson. We need someone that big to play that position. And you mentioned Fred Biletnikoff out of the University of Florida. He comes to the team, and they go 13-1 in 1967. They're the best team in pro football. And the Packers, they're on their last legs under Vince Lombardi, go 9-4-1 in the NFL, but they play the Raiders in the Super Bowl I think it was in Miami. I think the second one was at the Orange Bowl.
It was, yep.
And the Raiders they looked good in the first half, but they were outshined by the veteran Packers because they'd been there before. They knew how to play in championship games under the bright lights, and they defeated them. But the creation of the NFL also comes into being with the creation of NFL films and the voice of John Facenda. So I've lined up something which comes out right around this period of time. We don't have to play the whole thing, but I think you'll enjoy this, Harper. This says everything you need to know about the Oakland Raiders in the 1960s.
Yeah, on the moon.
The autumn wind is a pirate, blustering in from sea. With a rollicking song, he sweeps along, swaggering boisterously. His face is weather-beaten. He wears a hooded sash, with a silver hat about his head, and a bristling black mustache. He growls as he storms the country, a villain big and bold. And the trees all shake and quiver and quake as he robs them of their gold. The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won.
Does that say it all or what?
Facenda was amazing. A Philadelphia news announcer, very articulate. He would say things like, I never said on a steel gray morning across the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field. I would never have done that. It's redundant. The frozen tundra part is where he said I had an issue. And I thought it was always that. On a steel gray morning across the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field, the Green Bay Packers take on, and then you just finish it off. It was amazing. The voice of God right there. And he's one of the guys that really made the folklore, as you were talking about NFL films, when he would do a narration and the ball was in the air and it's spinning in slow motion and it's just going to land gently into Cliff Branch's hands or into any other receiver. Isaac Curtis, I remember they did one game of the week with Cincinnati against Detroit. Nobody's going to watch it, but they made it into something special. And the league learned to take that music, Steve and Ed Sable, the film that they put together, and create these masterpieces. And John Facenda absolutely was a tremendous part of that. There's no doubt that it's completely different today because of that. And in many respects, because of what the Raiders in their history, always being in a championship or at least being close in a playoff game. And whether it be the doggone official made a bad call or there's somebody that kicks their cleats, but they were the lovable losers for years until they finally won it in 75. And we'll get to most of that. But the characters that were a part of that, the different names that I'm sure you want to mention here that were a part of the Raider staff, I guess you could say. You mentioned Ben Davidson, obviously, and Darryl LaMonica, bringing Blanda over, for him to be the biggest scorer in NFL history, all these other names that are a part of the folklore of the Raiders.
there was a guy named Wells Twombly who wrote a book called The Oakland Raiders, Fireworks and Fury. And he had a chapter in there, and I looked this up. They had he was a scout, but he had a higher position. He was a second guy to Al Davis. He was like the number 2 guy behind managing general partner Al Davis. His official title, I'm not sure. But for the life of me, in the book or in the media guide, it said that during World War II, he had done certain clandestine activities in East Berlin. And it's like, what? I mean, seriously? And I don't know whether he actually did, but it created this mystique that the Raiders were like the Central Intelligence Agency. The Raiders were this cloak and dagger organization. The Raiders were they were quiet. They did it behind the scenes, and you never were quite sure. And that was the way Al Davis operated. But as far as the team on the field, the times were perfect for them. They matched the 1960s and 70s culturally. They're in Oakland wearing black, during a time of tremendous social upheaval, which is happening mostly in Oakland and Berkeley with the riots over at the University of California. The Black Panthers are going down within minutes of the Oakland Alameda County Coliseum, and most of those guys were probably Raider fans. They were renegades, and that was the way Al Davis liked it. And the autumn wind is a pirate. The way that song plays and the way that the words that are used as they are, pillaging the countryside, and they conquering and won, and they laughed as they conquered and won. That's how they were. And they also were involved in unbelievable events. And so we get to 1968, and the Raiders are again probably the best team in the league. And the other 2 really good teams, actually, the Chargers were 12-2 that year. The Chiefs were 12-2 that year, and the New York Jets under Joe Namath are 11-3. And they are more popular than the National Football League. For one thing, they've got the New York market because the New York Giants are terrible, and the Jets are great. So the Jets go out to Oakland. And this is November. It might have been Thanksgiving weekend. And it's a Sunday night. And the Jets are playing the Raiders, and the Jets have the lead late. They score late to take the lead. So now there's about 2 minutes, maybe a little less than 2 minutes to go. And it's 8 o'clock on the East Coast, 5 o'clock on the West Coast. The game is on NBC, and the NBC has scheduled the classic children's movie Heidi to come on at 8 o'clock. Well, what are we going to do? Well, it looks like the game is over. The Jets are going to hold. Let's switch to Heidi. So all these fans are in New York. Next thing that, they're watching Joe Namath versus Daryl LaMonica. Next thing they know, there's this little girl in the Swiss Alps with her grandfather. I go, what's going on here? Where's the football game? Some of them go to their radios, but many of them go to, the game's over. They go to dinner. It's before the internet. And meanwhile, on the West Coast, LaMonica throws a pass to a guy named Charlie Smith, and it's just a little flare out, and somehow he finds a seam and runs really right up the middle for a touchdown to give the Raiders the lead. Now they kick off to the Jets, and I think it was a guy named Christie fumbles it in the end zone for the Jets. The Raiders pick it up. So the Raiders have scored 14 points in a matter of 14 seconds to win the game. And it's always been known forevermore as the Heidi game, one of the great events in the history of professional sports and television. and people are waking up the next day, go to the newspapers. This is how you get your news. What the heck happened out there? Not only did they lose, they lost, by 10 points. They scored twice in the last minute of the game. So that was just one of those games. But of course, the Jets get their revenge. The Jets play the Raiders for the championship. And again, the Raiders rally late under LaMonica to take a 23-20 lead. And Namath gets the ball back deep in his own territory with 2 minutes to go and rallies the team. A prototypical Joe Namath late game rally that helps to make his myth and make his mark as a star in pro football. The Raiders actually get the ball back with enough time to maybe score a touchdown and pull this game out, because that's what they do. They're all about late game heroics, come from behind victories. So they're driving down the field, and LaMonica looks to make a little flare pass, like a sideline pass, and it's blustering wind. And the wind is blowing in and literally carries the ball back away from his intended target. It lands on the ground behind the receiver. Well, as you well know, Harper, if you throw a pass and it lands behind the line of scrimmage or behind the receiver or behind the quarterback, the line of demarcation of the throw, it's a fumble. That's what it is. It's recovered by the Jets. The Jets get the ball. It's still enough. It's really one of these first moments that, Al Davis will look on later as the game was taken from us, bad luck or bad officiating, or for whatever reason, we're not winning. And this all plays to this chip on the shoulder that Al Davis will get until they finally do win one. And of course, it's the Jets under Namath that go on to play the Colts in Super Bowl III. And of course, Namath makes his great prediction. But this all was really good for the league and for pro football, and ultimately for the Raiders, because it just made the league so popular, so much more exciting. But it was a great time for pro football. There's no question about that.
Yeah, you've got the lateral there, the tuck later on, the fumble against the Chargers in a playoff game, and then obviously the immaculate reception. You spend quite a bit of time in the book going over this. Why don't you talk a little bit about the research for this? I know the Raider fans and players, Phil Villapiano himself has said, the immaculate deception, yes, because the Raiders all declined that it ever happened. To a man, they will all say that, no, we had another one stolen from us. Madden and the referee have a conversation after the referee goes in and uses the bullpen phone to find out if there's security. There's so many interesting things about that. But talk a little bit about the research done for that, because, for years, the video evidence has been inconclusive. I know that the coaches have two angles. They've got one from the sideline. That's called 22, where you can see all 22 players. And then there's one that goes from behind the goalposts on each side of the field. You have an opportunity to see what happened there. But anyways, I'm leading up to this so much. I mean, one of the great plays in all of NFL history, and of course, it's part of the Raiders.
December 1972, and I believe the chapter was called A Black Day by the Bay, because on this day, the Raiders lost to the Steelers in the morning, and later on, the San Francisco 49ers had I think a 28-13 lead well into the fourth quarter against Roger Staubach and the Cowboys. And so a day that starts with a good chance that the Raiders could play the 49ers in an all Bay Area Super Bowl quickly dissolves into something else. So it's a morning game in the Bay Area. It's in Pittsburgh. And the Steelers, this is the beginning of the Steeler dynasty. They're not yet the great championship team that they would later become, although all the the players are in place. There is Jack Lambert. There's Frenchie Fuqua. There's Franco Harris. There's Terry Bradshaw. Don't think we have Lynn Swan yet. Lynn Swan really was kind of the difference. He came in a year or two later. But they were a great team. But the Raiders were the more experienced veteran team. But, of course, they're playing on the road, and it's a very, very difficult place to play. It's at Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh, and all these howling, blue-collar Steeler fans are cheering their team on. And it's one of these crazy games played in bitter cold. And the Steelers have a kicker named Roy Girella, kicks a couple of field goals that go up 6-0. The Raiders quarterback is Darryl LaMonica, and he was a great quarterback. He had been the most valuable player in the AFL, I think twice, threw for record-breaking amounts of yardage. But he's towards the end of his career, and he's not doing well in this game. And they have a backup. His name is Ken Stabler. And Stabler's been riding the bench since 1968. He was a star at the University of Alabama, but he's been biding his time behind LaMonica, and he doesn't think that LaMonica is better than him. And he finally gets an opportunity to come into this game. And the odds are stacked against him, and the weather is stacked against him. And there's really not much more than 2-3 minutes to play. I think less than 2 minutes, actually. And he's got the Raiders down at the Pittsburgh 30, and he calls a pass play, and he goes back to look. He's looking. The Raiders' offensive line in those days, Upshaw, Bob Brown, gave him so much time. But nobody could break free because the Steelers' defensive backs were just all over his intended receivers. And Stabler was not a great running quarterback, but he was a great athlete, and he runs for it, and he evades all those guys, the middle linebackers, Lambert, the defensive backs. They've been covering the wide receivers, and he runs 30 yards, gets in there. They kick an extra point, 7-6. Oakland takes the lead. Now we just got to hold them. Bradshaw is the quarterback of the Steelers, throws one pass, incomplete, throws another pass, incomplete, throws another pass, incomplete. The Raiders are holding. They're deep in their own territory. There's no time left. There's no time left even really for a field goal, even if you get one down the field. It's desperation. Bradshaw goes back. The Raiders are in prevent defense. Lets one fly. It's Franco Harris. And of course, he's a running back. He would never be down there, but it's send everybody you can but the kitchen sink to try to catch one. And the great linebacker out of Ohio State, help me out here, Harper.
Jack Tatum
hits Harris just as the ball is hitting both of them. And did it hit him in the hand? Did it hit him the wrist? Did it hit Harris? And there's different rule interpretations based upon who it hit first. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It's not Franco Harris.
Frenchie Fuqua.
It's Frenchie Fuqua. Forgive me. It's Frenchie Fuqua. The ball bounces off those guys. And, hey, looks like it's over. The camera doesn't even pick it up. And then all of a sudden, I could just imagine the guy in the truck going, go to camera 3. And all of a sudden you're looking at, what's that? And it's this Steeler guy running down the sideline with the football. How did that happen? Because the original play, I recall, you didn't even see him pick it up. And now it's just, just tackle him, because there's no time left on the clock. Because if you tackle him before he can get to the end zone, they won't have time for a field goal. It'll be a 7-6 Raider victory. Well, it isn't. He goes in. It's a touchdown. The fans storm for the field. Nobody calls a penalty of any kind. And as you say, John Madden, whose hair is askew, he looks like Frankenstein's bride. He's assailing the referee, it hit Fuqua, or it should be an illegal play. He's talking about the rules interpretations. And so the referee is going to call back for some sort of an instant replay of some kind, at least to mollify Madden, at least in the retelling. And according to Madden, he didn't really call anybody other than stadium security to see how many policemen there were. When he found out that there weren't enough to protect him from being killed by the angry mob that would have been the Steelers fans, he goes, "Touchdown, Steelers." So that's the Immaculate Reception, December 1972.
Yeah, again, one of the great plays of NFL history, and Franco Harris, of course. And if you look at this, next time anybody wants to look at this film, notice that Franco Harris is in the scene when Bradshaw throws the ball. It was 4th and 10 from the 40-yard line. The Steelers were on their 40-yard line. The throw was down to about the 30 or the 25-yard line in Raider territory, but that's how far the ball bounced back. Franco was taught in college, just follow the ball. And so when Bradshaw delivers it, his job was to protect Bradshaw and give him a little extra time and make sure they didn't blitz and force him out of the pocket. But then the ball bounces and ricochets off of Tatum and Frenchie Fuqua. If he touches it, it's an incomplete play, and that's what the Raiders assess. But again, one of the amazing things that in NFL history, we see the Packers, and then we finally see the Jets. You mentioned them. Then the Chiefs, then Dallas and Miami, then the Steelers, and finally the Raiders get their Super Bowl appearance. They go against Minnesota, and this is their time to shine. Another one of many very, very good teams. They didn't finish second this year, so obviously the 75, 76, 77 Raiders were amazing. They were so good, but they had to get through the Steelers, who had also gotten very good. Talk about that rivalry, especially in the playoffs.
Okay, I'm going to get to that, but I'm going to stay chronological, Harper. In 1973, now there was a chapter in the book called Hunter S. Thompson and the Raider Mystique, and this is my favorite chapter in the book. And in 1973, Hunter S. Thompson was a cult figure and a writer who had written the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and then Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail 72, and he'd written the Hell's Angels, which already marked him as sort of this figure in Oakland. And he had lived in San Francisco, writing for the San Francisco-based Rolling Stone magazine. And he decides, and he's a huge football fan. He'd actually done an interview with Richard Nixon where he sat in the limousine, and the proviso was they'll talk only about football, not politics. And Thompson actually came out of that interview really saying, well, Nixon isn't who I think he is, because Nixon had wowed him with his knowledge of football, talking about, oh yeah, this guy is a first-round draft pick out of Miami. He's going to be really good. And he knew all the players, where they'd gone to college, everything there was to know about pro football. So now Thompson decides in 73, in his mind, the team that's going to win the Super Bowl is going to be the Raiders. So he's going to visit the Raiders for this big, huge piece. In those days, these magazine articles would be 10, 12 pages, and they'd take 8 months to write. So this is going to come out just before the Super Bowl. But he's meeting him like during training camp or just as the season is beginning. And he comes out to Oakland. He somehow gets a press credential. He's on the field. And Al Davis sees Hunter S. Thompson, who was his head was shaved because he had shaved his head bald when he ran for mayor of Aspen, Colorado. And Davis goes, "Who the hell is that?" And Jack Smith of the Chronicle says, that's Hunter S. Thompson. He's got a press credential because Dave Bergen gave him one. Bergen, oh my, ran that guy out of here with a cattle prod. Bergen, by the way, was my editor with the San Francisco Examiner. So I know a lot of this story, and a lot of this came from things that Bergen had told me later. And in fact, I was later actually considered a colleague of Hunter S. Thompson because my column was on the left side of the front page, his column on the right side. So our names were practically next to each other. But anyway, he doesn't trust Thompson. He doesn't want Thompson to be around. Thompson, therefore, knows that the Raiders all hang out at dive bars in places like Hayward and San Leandro, blue-collar areas where most of the team lives. This isn't San Francisco. This is a different part of the Bay Area. This is where the biker bars are, and the Hells Angels and the Black Panthers. And this is the Raider. These are the Raider people. And this is where Thompson meets half of the Raider players and interviews them and gets all kinds of great stuff. He finally eventually gets Davis, and Davis starts talking to him about environmental determinism. I don't know if that's global warming or what exactly is the meaning of that, but he finally just says, what are you after? I don't trust you. So the article finally does come out, and it was a great article. The only problem was that the Raiders didn't make it to the Super Bowl in the 73 season. That was when the Steelers won their first Super Bowl. But it was a great piece, and I recommend people go back and try to find it. You can get it online. But that was my favorite part of the book. So then we get to 1976. The Raiders had gone 12-2 in 74 and had the best team in either league that season. Kenny Stabler came into his own and was the MVP of the league, and they were a dynamite ball club. But they'd somehow managed to lose at home to the Pittsburgh Steelers in the playoffs. Then in 75, again, they play the Steelers in the playoffs. This time it's, again, freezing cold at Three Rivers Stadium. The Steelers win the game. What do we have to do to win? These are championship games. The team's made it to the championship game almost every season since 1968, outside of, I think, the 71 campaign. Finally, in 76, all the stars align. They open the season, again, they're playing Pittsburgh. They're at home. And the Steelers get off to a big lead. And it's like, oh, here we go again. You cannot beat Pittsburgh. And Stabler leads them. This is a home game on a magnificent drive late in the game. And they pull the game out and win it. And they win their first 4. They finally lose, but then they go on another winning streak, and they go 13-1. Then they're the best team in pro football. And then they play the New England Patriots with my good friend, the late, great Sam Bam Cunningham. And the Patriots are beating the Raiders quite handily, and it's a very late comeback by Oakland. There's a controversial call that goes against the Patriots. So finally, actually what's happening is the luck is finally going the Raiders' way after everything going against them for so many years, whether it's the Immaculate Reception or various calls by officials. This time it goes against the Patriots. They finally play the Steelers in the title game. The Steelers are decimated by injuries, not decimated. That's the wrong word. It means every 10th. I always get mad when people use that word. The Steelers are hurt by injuries, and the Raiders win. They go play the Minnesota Vikings in what's almost a home game. It's at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena on a beautiful day. And Stabler has a great game. The running game is clicking. And then Willie Brown intercepts a Fran Tarkenton pass and runs it back. And Bill King is announcing the game, and he goes, "Old Man Willie," and this was one of the great Raider John Vicenta moments, as he's describing the Raiders finally winning a world championship. John Madden, who's a huge 300-pound guy, being carried off the field on the shoulders of his team, his hair again flying all over the place. Madden and Hank Stram were these two opposite figures. Madden, disheveled; Hank Stram, the son of a clothing salesman, beautifully coiffed and well dressed. I'll give you a great John Madden, Hank Stram story. It's right around this time, and the Chiefs are in Oakland, and there is some plumbing issues in Oakland, and there are rats in the Chiefs locker room. Now, apparently the rats are not in the Raiders locker room, but they're in the Chiefs locker room. So they see these rats, and Madden goes to Strand and goes, "Yeah, Hank, there's a little bit of a problem in your locker room. Boom! You see, there's some rats. And they're going to be cleared out, but the next time you're here, next season. But in the meantime, there's rats in the locker room. But good luck." So, of course, the Chiefs are completely disheveled by this problem with the rats, and they lose badly to the Raiders. And that was, whether those rats were planted there by Al Davis, who knows? But that was a funny story that John Madden said. But yeah, that period of time, this was the highlight of the Oakland Raiders. They had unbelievable players. They had a running back named Mark Van Egan. This is a typical Al Davis pickup. Davis is in a hotel scouting some players, and he goes down to the weight room to lift weights, and he sees this guy with really big, strong legs. He's working out. Are you a football player? He goes, "Yeah." "What's your name?" "Mark Van Egan." "Mark Van Egan. Where'd you play?" "I played at Colgate," which is not, a big time collegiate football power. But Davis likes what he sees. He likes his work ethic, the size of his legs, drafts him, signs him. He's a star player for the Raiders, Picks up Cliff Branch, wide receiver. I think he came out of the University of Colorado. This was speed. This team was all about speed, and the game is changing. And so you've got Biletnikoff is sort of the guy who's just a shifty wide receiver who could break away from his defender, whereas Branch would just outrun everybody and catch it way down the field. They had probably the greatest offensive line in pro football history. A lot of rules have been changed to make that kind of blocking technique not available today. But at the time, you would just look at Stabler and Bill King, the announcer, goes, "Stabler dropping back, looking. I mean, it was just like, how much time does this guy have? He was a great quarterback, don't get me wrong, but when you have an offensive line like that, you're just going to find somebody, and he sure did. And they did it all. They did it on offense, and they did it on defense.
Yeah, there's so many Hall of Famers that are part of the organization. It doesn't include, Art Shell and Upshaw, Dave Dalby, Mosbar, who was just getting started around that time. Obviously the best tight end in the game, and Dave Casper. Talk a little bit about, they win the Super Bowl, you think everything's going to be right, and then Madden decides, this is not for me anymore. I'm burned out. I want to go try something else, and what that meant to the organization.
Yeah. And he always said that he had a great relationship with Al Davis. And I think he did, but there's also a lot of pressure. Madden was quoted as saying, I don't have a mountain cabin. I don't go anywhere in the off season. My life is football. So he was one of those guys who just his whole life was scouting, teaching, coaching. And the team after the 76 season, in 77, they're again very good. And they got another play that goes against them. I think it was a running back named Rob Lytle out of the University of Michigan. Fumbles the ball, running it into the end zone for Denver. Should have gone against or should have gone against Denver, goes against Oakland, and the Broncos win the AFC Championship that year. Then you have, I think it was 78 or 79. Madden is still there, and they have this holy roller play. And Stabler is at about the 7. There's no time left, and he can't get a throw off. He's about to be tackled, and before his knee touches, he kind of throws the ball forward, and it rolls and rolls and rolls, and several guys on both teams touch it until it's finally captured in the end zone for a Raider touchdown. Bill King announces this. The aplomb of Bill King. Madden is on the field talking to the referee. He wants to know if it's real. He says it is. Get your big butt out of here. I mean, that was literally Bill King being existential in that he wants to know if it's real. Is it a dream or not? But all of these events had occurred, and Madden, he was a Bay Area guy, and he decides to hang it up and move on to other things. And of course, he made more money and more fame as an announcer and as the name behind the Madden video game than he ever did as a coach for Al Davis. But none of that would have been possible had it not been for the 11 years that he was the coach of the Oakland Raiders. He came in, took over from John Roush. And Madden was, I think, 33 when he was the coach. John Madden had played at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And he was on the team, or he knew about the players who were on the team when they had a airplane crash. I think Ted Tollner, who was USC's coach, was also one of the survivors of that airplane crash. And that made John Madden really afraid of flying. And that was another big factor in why he left the Raiders, because you have to fly to these games. There's no way out of it. Later, when he becomes an announcer, he buys a bus and he buses to all the games. He's just, you leave one part of the country on Sunday night and you pull into, the other side of the country, Friday or Saturday. After 6 days on the road, you're able to do it. And that's what he was able to do. But a lot of it was because of his fear of flying. And he didn't like that aspect of being a pro football coach.
Well, his ring that has the diamonds on it with the 100, obviously those are some big numbers that any coach would have in such a short amount of time. His legacy, for obvious reasons, and winning the Super Bowl and being the first, that's obviously has his place. But then Tom Flores comes in, and let's move forward. And there's 2 more Super Bowls that they get to win early in the 80s. So the team is still successful. They don't win every year. They're not the best in the conference every year, but boy, they're pretty doggone close, aren't they?
Yeah, and of course, this was a period of time in which I knew a lot of Raider players. Starts off the Raider, I go to the University of Southern California, and the Raiders are playing at the LA Coliseum, and I'm going to Raider games. The tickets were cheap. They were quite available. They weren't selling the place out. It holds 90,000, so they were drawing 65,000. So there's tickets, and you can sit in some of the cheap seats. So I would go to those games, and of course they were really good. Marcus Allen, who was a great Trojan, he comes to the Raiders. They pick up Howie Long, which was a huge move for them out of not Boston, Villanova, right? Villanova,
yeah.
Howie Long played. And they were a different kind of team. The Raiders had been, in the Madden years and the Stabler years, a rollicking, rolling party type of team. And they would train. In fact, they continued to train in Santa Rosa even when they went down to Los Angeles. But when they would go to Santa Rosa, the stories were just incredible of them going into these bars and the locals and the fun that they were having. And a lot of it can't even really be told, but you can certainly use your imagination. The Raiders under Flores, as we get into the 80s, the times were changing. But there was a period there where I was the manager of a restaurant. This is when I was in law school, and I'm part-time manager on weekends of this place called the 502 Club, which was basically across the street from USC, and the Raiders are playing at the Coliseum. And on Sundays, the owner of the place, he starts inviting all these Raiders and Raiderettes in there. So I got to know a lot of Raider players in the late 1980s during this Los Angeles period of time. But the team wins a Super Bowl in 1983 under Flores. This is with Jim Plunkett. This is another Al Davis resurrection. Jim Plunkett, great star, Heisman Trophy winner from Stanford, goes to the New England Patriots. Actually, his very first game ever with the New England Patriots. It was the first game at Foxborough Stadium against the Raiders. And the Raiders are defending Western Division champions and a powerhouse team, and the Patriots are not strong. There's no way that the Patriots are going to beat the Raiders. Well, Jim Plunkett leads them to a 20-6 victory. Plunkett has mixed success in New England, ends up being traded to his hometown team, the San Francisco 49ers. He starts the season 6-0 and then kind of fades and loses his starting job. And he's ready to leave pro football. He comes to the team, and in 1980, while they're still in Oakland, he is backup quarterback to Dan Pastorini. Pastorini is injured. Plunkett comes on and leads them to a magnificent and surprising Super Bowl victory over the Philadelphia Eagles. This included, on the way, a victory over the Cleveland Browns in very cold conditions in Cleveland in January, which was one of the things that the Raiders were able to do. The Raiders were one of those West Coast warm weather teams that still performed well in cold weather. The Los Angeles Rams, as a contrast to that, were a team that never could win in cold weather and would go back to Minnesota, most famously Minnesota, and lose. But the Raiders were made of sterner stuff. 83, Plunkett has a magnificent year, and they've got the great Marcus Allen, has a fantastic season. He runs for an 80-yard touchdown run against the Washington Redskins, a team they lost to in a really great game during the regular season, but then the Redskins were no match for them in the Super Bowl. In 85, the Raiders again looked like they were probably the best team in the league, but they were beaten in the playoffs by the New England Patriots, who were a team ascending. And that was the end of the great Raider run. Their last years in Los Angeles were not happy years. The fan base went down and became a dangerous place to be. But their first 5 years or so with the Los Angeles Raiders, those were glory years for the team and for the franchise. I mean, they won 2 Super Bowls in Los Angeles as opposed to – no, I'm sorry. They won 1 Super Bowl. That's right. They won 2 Super Bowls in Oakland and 1 in Los Angeles. So it was a big deal for them when they went down to L.A.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, you know, the city wanted to embrace them. And when they left, L.A. was without a team for, 20, 25 years before the Rams returned. And then the Chargers came back also. Oakland goes from L.A. back to Oakland. Now they're in Vegas, so lots of different issues. What's next in terms of your chronological order that is what noteworthy for the book itself and from your study and passion for the team that you want to go over?
Well, the next story I want to tell is a personal story that involves me, but it definitely involves the team. This is 2001. It was a very odd thing that occurred. It's 2001 that will play out later, 7 years later, when the book comes out in 2008. I'm actually at the Oakland Coliseum covering the Oakland A's, and it's right after the draft, maybe just before the draft. I think it's before the draft, and the Raiders are looking to make some moves with the draft, trading some draftees and what have draft spots, and they're looking to get a wide receiver. And Jerry Rice is now a free agent after years of breaking records with the San Francisco 49ers. And the word is they're going to sign one of two players. It's going to be Andre Reed, who had been with the, am I correct there, Harper? Andre Reed had been with the Atlanta Falcons.
Andre Rison.
Andre Rison. Andre Reed played for the Buffalo Bills.
Correct.
Okay. Did you play with Andre Rison?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then you'll understand this comment. So it's going to be Rison or Rice. So I'm a columnist with the Examiner. I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to get a scoop. And so I see Greg Papa. Greg Papa was the Raiders' play-by-play man. He had replaced Bill King. Bill King had got into an argument with Al Davis, and Davis had fired him. King went to the Oakland A's, and Greg Papa at that time is the Raiders play-by-play man, and he's also doing Warriors basketball, and he's doing A's television. So he's standing there, and I know Greg Papa because he had interviewed me. And I go, hey, Greg, can you give me, as a Raider inside source, can you tell me whether the Raiders are going to sign Rice or Rison? And he goes, it's going to be Rice. Al thinks that Rison has done too much living. That was his quote. As you may recall, I'm sure you'll recall, he had dated Lisa Left Eye Lopez, rap singer. They'd owned a house in Atlanta, and she got mad at Andre for something and burned the house down. So this was among the reasons that Al felt that he'd done too much living. And Rice, of course, had an immaculate reputation and work ethic. So, they're going to sign Rice. I said, can I quote you as a Raider source for this breaking news? He goes, yes, you can. So I go to the Examiner, I write it up, and Rice, Raiders will sign Rice. I break the news. It's breaking. It's a breaking story. It's ahead of everybody else. Got
Sure.
this editor, and he goes, well, who's your source on this? I go, well, I really shouldn't reveal him, but it's Greg Papa. And he goes, well, Greg Papa's not a Raiders source. I go, what do you mean he's not a Raiders source? He's just like I had said to you earlier, Bill King was an employee of the team. Greg Papa was an employee. He might have been an employee of Comcast when it came to the Warriors or the Oakland A's. When it came to the Raiders, he was an employee of the Oakland Raiders, and he worked for Al Davis, and he was a Raiders source. And he said yes when I said, can you quote me as a Raiders source? And he was absolutely, he was an inside man with the team. Okay, we'll print it. And of course, that is what happened. And that was fine. And I would see Greg Papa after. I said, hey, thank you very much for, giving me that scoop. It was a great scoop. So 2008 comes out, and I write, and you can see in the back of the book, I think it's in the chapter called The Raiders CIA. And it was the same chapter where I talked about this guy, Ron Wolf, and his supposed connection in East Berlin. And this went down to the point of how does Al Davis operate? He operates in secrecy, and how does he use the press? So I'm looking at, well, why did Greg Papa let me know that they were going to sign Rice? Must have been some reason. There must have been some, why did he not clam up and say, oh, I can't tell you that, or Al will certainly. He'd given me the information very freely, and I surmised, and whether I was right or wrong, I surmised that they wanted the information out there maybe to see what the public reaction to it would be. And not that I could see any reason why the Bay Area would not want Jerry Rice instead of Andre Rison. I mean, Jerry Rice being an icon across the Bay. And of course, he had some very good years with the Raiders. Well, I print it. The problem was this time I don't print it up as a Raiders source. I put Greg Papa's name in there. And Greg Papa calls me up, and he is, what are you doing to me? You're trying to get me fired. And he was just freaked out that Al would read it and see it, Greg Papa, as having divulged inside information about the Raiders, which is not how I'd seen it. I thought there had been some strategy behind divulging the information. And he asked me to contact Davis. I had to write a letter, and in this letter I actually said some things that were not really true, because I had done it as I just described, or certainly as I thought it was. Whether I was wrong or not, or in surmising the reasons for Papa to give me that information, I'm not really sure. But I had given Greg Papa's name in this book, and then I had to contact David and says, no, I was wrong about that, and then he really didn't tell me that, and it was just his opinion, but it hadn't been his opinion. He had given it to me as a Raider source because I'd asked him, and he was very clear about that. But, I see Greg Papa today. In fact, I saw him at dinner just a few months ago, and it's all water under the bridge. And that nothing ever happened as far as Al Davis. He continued to be the Raiders play-by-play man until Al passed away. And then now he's the San Francisco 49ers play-by-play man. His signature touchdown call is touchdown San Francisco. He's a great announcer, and I'm a big fan. But that was a notable thing that occurred towards the end of that book.
Lots of things when you get into negotiations with players. We'd love to have Jerry Rice. We will attempt to sign him. That's not the same as the Raiders have signed him, even though it hasn't been made public yet. So I can see that there's a very minimal edge there between black and white. The gray area is as sharp as a razor for obvious reasons. But I'm glad that you and the rest of the organization were able to break bread again later on. Was there any difficulty in writing the book where you said there's some things that no one wants to come forward and talk about this? I wouldn't imagine that. I mean, I'm just asking in case that was a possibility, because I would think everybody there, including Jerry Rice or any of the others, whether it be Gannon or Marinovich or Wisniewski, I'm thinking some of the other Tim Brown, all would love to talk about their time with that organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I did talk to Todd Marinovich, and he was very open. And, I'm friends with Todd Marinovich. And for reasons that I cannot explain, Todd Marinovich is not coming on Take 5 with Steven Travers to talk about his new book. He's got a brand new book out. He's very open in the book. I've read the book. I enjoy it a lot, and I think I'm going to review it on Substack. If you can get Todd Marinovich, great. But for some reason, and I've interviewed him for other books. I interviewed him for What It Means to Be a Trojan, and I was a friend of his for many years, and I know his ups and downs, and I know he's certainly not worried about my revealing any of the bad things that happened, when he was in the throes of his drug addiction, because he's been completely open about that on the Marinovich Project and now in this book. Jim Plunkett, Jim Plunkett is a very, very controlled, polished Stanford guy, so he was only going to talk about positive things. And, what negative thing is he going to say about his time with the Raiders? I mean, they resurrected his career. They made him into a pro football star instead of just a college star.
Yeah.
Howie Long, the same kind of thing. Howie Long. When you talk to Howie Long, it's a PR kind of interview. So as far as some of these, I wasn't able to get Stabler. That was difficult. I tried with Ken Stabler for this book and also for what it means to, or not what it means to be a Trojan. A one night, two teams, Alabama versus USC. Talk about Bear Bryant. So you don't always get everybody, A big help with this book was my friend Bruce McGowan, who you shall recall was on this show back, I think, in May. Bruce wrote the foreword of the book, and he had a lot of Raider stories. He was really there far more than I was. I was in the press box for, some Raider games, covered them for the Examiner, was a fan, but Bruce was working every Raider game for decades, really, at least in their Oakland years. So he had a lot of great stories. And so much of it, there's been so much written about them. Wells Twombly wrote a great book. There was an Al Davis biography. There was a pretty good biography of Jim Plunkett. Marcus Allen had a biography out. So there was a lot that I could glean from these stories, and so much just from my own youth, listening to Bill King, listening to talk radio. For instance, John Madden used to be a regular on KNBR 680, which was it's the big sports station in San Francisco, and they had a guy by the name of Frank Dill. And Frank Dill would have John Madden on every morning, like 7 o'clock in the morning, maybe 8 in the morning. And he would talk for 15 minutes. It was a regular thing. And I recall that it was during the 88 World Series postseason, and the Mets had a pitcher named Ojeda. And Ojeda had been mowing his lawn, and his finger had somehow got caught in the machine, and a small part of his finger had been sliced off, and it made him unable to play in the playoffs. And so Frank Dill said to John Madden, John, should there be something in their contracts stating that these guys, can't do things like that? And Madden just goes, that guys do stuff, the way he said it. And so literally the chapter about John Madden was, quote, guys do stuff, Yeah. And that was what the Raiders did. I mean, they had Tom Keating and Ben Davidson would ride motorcycles all around California, up and down the coast. Today they probably wouldn't be allowed by their clubs to do that. Davidson had a little bit of a movie career as the bouncer in a pornographic film called Behind the Green Door. And I think Davidson probably thought he would make a few extra bucks in the offseason and nobody would ever see it. And it became a cult classic. So everybody in the world knew that Ben Davidson had been in this movie. And, the Raiders were part of Oakland. When Al Davis got there, he would tirelessly go to Rotary clubs, Chamber of Commerce meetings, high schools, and talk to the community about this football team and come out to the stadium. He offered discount ticket rates and for groups. And he just built up that team to the point where the city of Oakland really took to them, the whole East Bay. And as I said, the East Bay is not San Francisco. San Francisco is glitter, Golden Gate Bridge, big, huge skyscrapers, fancy restaurants and clubs and money. And Oakland is, it's the airport bar off of Hegenberger Road where Kenny Stabler and his guys would go and drink after practice, and the fans would all be there, or they'd go to these other dive bars, and they'd go to this bar at the Hyatt, which was this notorious hotel very close to the stadium. I think it was known as a drug hangout and for swingers parties. So this was Oakland in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. They were part of a very unique time in the history of Northern California. This is Oakland is not San Francisco. They're not Los Angeles. They are a different sort of place. And that team and that time, they represented that area, I think, as well as any team has ever represented any city in the history of pro sports.
Yeah, well, the one story that I heard that really kind of reminisces the difference between the Raiders and the rest of the league is Ahmad Rashad. Remember Bobby Moore,
yeah.
same person.
University of Oregon, yeah.
Right. And his first year in the league, he's with the Cardinals. And Don Coryell was the head coach then. And he had an amazing reputation offensively throughout the NFL, but he's got the head coaching job. And what he required his players to do going into a game was to wear a coat and tie, and he preferred it to be in team colors. Well, everyone knows that the St. Louis Cardinals back in those days were red and white. So just about everybody had a red or a similar color, maybe burgundy. A few had black, but they had team-colored suits that they wore, or sport coats, and they had red ties or maybe a pink tie or something black. They get off the bus at Oakland Alameda Coliseum, and as they get off the bus, they look just off to the left where the Raiders parking lot is. And there are a few of the players that don't have to go in yet, so they don't. And they're all having a smoke, and they're next to their Harley. And the girls there are wearing blue jeans with biker boots and tank tops, and they've got a few necklaces out there. There's tattoos everywhere, and it is a completely different vibe than what here the Cardinals are coming off. And Ahmad Rashad says, here we are. We look like the Carnation Ice Cream Men getting ready to go into the stadium, and there's all these Raiders out there, and they look like they came straight from San Quentin. He goes, they beat the brakes off of us. Yeah. And I knew then that we were a completely different organization than what they were. So if that has anything to do with the folklore of the Raider mystique and everything like that, other players knew it as well. Go ahead, Steve.
Well, you bring up a great memory actually not a great memory, but a Raider memory of Bobby Moore. And I believe it was the opening game of this 1974 season. And it's Monday Night Football, and the Raiders are playing the Buffalo Bills. And I think it was the very first game I ever played at Orchard Park Stadium, which is now Highmark in Buffalo, stadium I actually went to last year and watched the Bills beat the 49ers in a complete snowstorm. We did a whole show on that about a year ago. That was one of my favorite shows. Anyway, and I'll never forget, Bobby Moore is not Bobby Moore. He's Ahmad Rashad. So the whole time I'm going, who's this guy, Ahmad Rashad? It was the same thing. It was like when Lou Alcindor changed his name to Kareem Jabbar. I went half the season wondering, who's this guy Jabbar who scores 34 points every night? And where's Alcindor? Is he hurt? There's no internet these days. You don't know these things unless you really dive into it. But as I recall, Ahmad Rashad had a great game, and I scored Raiders in that opening game in 74, something like 21-20. And that was a pretty good Bills team that had Rashad, Joe Ferguson out of the University of Arkansas, and Rashad, and O.J. Simpson was their star running back. But you also mentioned he looks over to the side and he sees the Raiders and a couple of their girls. Well, Ken Stabler did not one, but two nude layouts for like Swank magazine or something like that. I think you can still find it on the internet. One was with Carol Doda, and the other was literally with a Raiderette cheerleader. Can you imagine this happening today? The quarterback and a Raiderette cheerleader. I mean, it's soft core in someplace. This is the mid 70s, and that was the world of pro sports in those days. We talked about Bo Belinsky, and there was Joe Namath, and all the stories that emanated from Joe Namath. I mean, there was this one player, he was a player in the league, and he comes out of his hotel the day they're going to play the Jets, and he sees Namath coming out of his hotel with a model, And so all of this stuff is before the internet, and the players were having a good time, and the Raiders, I think, were the world champions of having a good time. Oakland was it was a city where a good time could be had, and it was.
Yeah, tough town for obvious reasons, but also very loyal to their team and their players. You mentioned the Ken Stabler situation. What a shame that the league didn't honor him. He had to die first before he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. I still think that's such a black eye and embarrassment for the writers to not do it in the right path that they should have. Do me a small favor. Was there anybody that you really would have wanted to talk to, either a little bit longer or just to get together? There's so many names that you can think of, but in terms of putting the book together and confirming some resources or just getting a different perspective, who were some of the guys that you would love to have interviewed?
Stabler and Madden. Madden was right in the middle of, being on his bus and being John Madden. And Stabler, I can't explain it because I talked to his wife or his common law wife, whoever he was with at the time. I'll talk to Ken. We'll try to get it done and, try to follow up. I don't know whether I was considered a big enough writer at the time. I had written One Night, Two Teams, which I think he probably I'd sent him a copy, but he would have definitely been, for no other reason than, stories and just to listen to that drawl of his as he's describing things. Ken Stabler was a great baseball player as well. He matched up. They would have these great series. I think they were called the Alabama-Florida series. I think literally there's a country band called the Alabama-Florida line that is named after this series that was played. It was a baseball series in which the best teams from Pensacola would play the best teams from, southern Alabama. And this matched up Don Sutton out of Pensacola versus Ken Stabler and I think Stabler beat Don Sutton 1-0. But this leads me to a great story. This is a great Ken Stabler story. And I just got this through sources because I didn't talk to either one of the people, but the story is just fantastic. So it's the Tide of Casper. Okay. What was his first name?
Dave
Casper. Dave Casper out of Notre Dame. And Dave Casper was good friends with Kenny Snake Stabler. The Snake invites him to Alabama in the off season. It's known as the Redneck Riviera because it's right on the Gulf of Mexico. And, it's an oceanfront area, but it's not oceanfront like you might think of Malibu or Miami Beach. It's a very different kind of oceanfront. And it's very hot and it's very humid. And so Casper gets down there and Snake goes, let's go fishing. Okay, we're going to go fishing. They get in Stabler's truck. They drive it to the bait store. They buy this huge barrel of chum that they're going to use as bait. They're going to take it out on the waters and they're going to chum the waters. And, obviously fish are attracted to the chum and they're going to capture these fish. So they're on the way out there and they hit a bump and the barrel of bait and chum falls off of the truck and onto the pavement of the road. It's 100 degrees. It's in the middle of the summer. It's super humid. And within a very short period of time, all of this chum is like frying on the road like you're at a griddle restaurant. And within a short period of time, as Stabler wrote, I think this was in Stabler's autobiography, it looked like an Alfred Hitchcock movie. So the birds are everywhere eating all this chum, that's burning on the asphalt. So they just kind of look at each other like, nah, let's not go fishing. So they went to the bar instead, and that's what they did. So I always loved that story.
Yeah, Ken definitely could put a beer down, or maybe something even a little bit a little harder, a little brown liquor. I remember watching him do an interview with about 10 or 15 other Alabama greats. They're in a studio and they're sitting kind of in an oval-shaped circle around one another, and you can see the respect, the admiration of the other players. When Ken started talking, everybody kind of shut up and they let him tell his story, because he had some great ones. He and Bear Bryant, of course, and Coach Bryant. It was, and he certainly had so many of those with the Raiders, and even further beyond when he goes to New Orleans and ends his career. One of the great players and characters, really. And as I mentioned, what a shame that the writers waited till after he passed before they decided to let him in and give him the time to thank the people that made his career. The good, the bad, the ugly are the first 3 chapters that you have in the book. In the Clutch is another one. It ain't over till it's over. Winners, a little intrigue, and then the all-time Raider team. As far as some of the other portions of the book that would make it for an easy read for our viewers if they wanted to get a hold of it and put it together. You mentioned that there were certain chapters and portions of the book that you obviously had favorites toward, but in and of itself, because you had to write it at one point at 2008, that there's a certain part of history today that's still missing. But is there anything that you missed in the editing process that you wish you had another few pages that you could write one additional story or one other moment in the history of the team that you didn't get to put in because editors and other folks said, no, we're going to shorten it down a little bit?
By the time I wrote this book, I was at the height of my writing career. I had written One Night, Two Teams and the USC Trojans, college football's all-time greatest dynasty, and then the Bonds book. And those were best-selling books. And my publisher editor was Rick Reinhardt. And I cannot say enough about Rick because he saved my career. And he was the one who really wanted me to write this book. And I was, nobody had to twist my arm because it almost wrote itself. I knew so much about the team and loved it. So Rick never did that to me. I had other editors who just killed me. I wrote a Mets book that was it should have been so much joy writing about the 69 Mets. And it was like pulling teeth. I had this new agent who was a pain in the butt. I had more trouble with photographs. This one, the photographs, it was great. This wonderful guy named Michael Zagaris, who I got to know, provided all the photos. And there were some really good photos, and that he took all of them. Michael Zagaris, one of the great photographers of all time, all sports in the Bay Area and all rock and roll in the Bay Area. So every band that has ever come through, from the Doors to Journey to, Creedence, Who, and you name it, Michael Zagaris been right there taking great rock and roll photographs. And he just has this knack for, clicking it just as the ball is coming into the guy's hands, just as the collision is occurring. There's so many figures. Ben Davidson, getting into who he was and where he came from. He was from downtown Los Angeles, which a lot of people didn't realize. And he was a very scary figure, but more of a gentle giant off of the field. You had, Villapiano, Ted Hendricks. So there was a guy, I managed to get him in a sports bar in Pasadena, and, telling me stories about playing against O.J. Simpson when he was at the University of Miami. And then he was with the Colts when Joe Willie guaranteed the victory over them in Super Bowl III and came through. And then he goes to the Raiders, and he was just made to be a Raider. He wild antics, and he would put on this Halloween face that made him look like a Frankenstein or something like that. But Rick Reinhardt was great. Nothing was cut out. Oh no, it's too long. He never did that to me. I'd sometimes even make books longer in the last rewrite, and he never would complain. And he saved me. I can't say enough about Rick.
Well, I appreciate Rick giving you the freedom and the liberty. You're talking about an organization that the names that you mentioned and hundreds of others that everybody can think of. It may not be your favorite team. It may be the team that you can't stand or despise, but you still have to recognize the fact that the Oakland Raiders, the Los Angeles Raiders, then the Oakland Raiders again, were certainly a tremendous part of NFL history. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the show, you can talk about the Patriots, the Ravens, the Colts, whether it be Indianapolis or Baltimore. You can talk about the Dolphins, the Packers, the Chiefs, of course. There are some great organizations that have been part of the league. The 49ers, don't let me forget them, and the Steelers, of course. But the Raiders were certainly a part of that. And you either beat them or were beaten by them in a way that you go, man, that really was a great game for whatever the reasons are. It's called The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It is heart-pounding, jaw-dropping, and gut-wrenching moments from the Oakland Raiders history. Steven, give me one final thought here before we go.
That book remains a fairly good seller to this day, and I still get a lot of commentary from Raider fans because Raider fans, they cling to the history of this team. So I still get emails and commentary, and I am still regularly interviewed. There's a Las Vegas station that calls me and interviews me, every year or so, every 2 years.
Yeah.
To talk about this book and the history of the Raiders. There's a Raider podcast that has me on. And amazingly, their fans have followed them no matter where they are. They followed them when they went to Los Angeles. And I think they're still following them in Las Vegas, even though their entire dynamic of the team and their image has completely changed. But the only problem with the Raiders, they're kind of like the Cowboys. They're one of these iconic teams. But what have you done for me lately? It's been years since the Raiders have really been a legitimate contender. But and I don't know if whether they're going to get there with Pete Carroll or not. But they have a history that is like very few, a unique history. I would say the only other team I'd compare them to in terms of a unique history is with the Brooklyn Dodgers, as they were in Brooklyn. This was a team that their fans loved them, and they they knew their fans by first names. They were not a roped off velvet VIP section group of guys. They were, Kenny the Snake studying the playbook by the light of the jukebox.
Yeah, and dem bums, right? The locals, if you were from Brooklyn, you could call them that, but heaven forbid you be from the Bronx and try to do something like that. But the history, the mystique, and the attempt to go from nothing in the league to becoming champions and trying to resurrect that. Every team tries to do that, some better than others, but it's been an amazing accomplishment for the organization itself. And as I've said on numerous occasions, their history and point of it in the league is as good as any out there. I won't say second to none, because there are several organizations, like I just mentioned a few moments ago, that obviously have an equally tremendous history. But some of them you don't want to write about the same way you do the Raiders. It's a very interesting read, and thank you for putting that together. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, that's Steven Travers, and we take 5 with Steven every week. We do so on Thursdays. We thank you for being a part of today's show. So for Logan Landers, our producer, our engineer, Steven Travers, obviously the co-host and the author with the expertise here, it's his book. And if you want to get a copy of it, Steven, tell us where you can do that. Is that with Amazon? Everybody right now, I wouldn't go to the bookstore because they don't have them anymore. We used to have them all the time. How can they get a copy of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly?
Amazon is your best bet. And to be honest, you can probably get a used copy for $5 or $6, and buy 5 for your family.
What about you got previously enjoyed. What about an autograph? Could somebody reach out to you specifically and say, hey, I want to buy the book and I'd love for you to sign it?
You can probably put some commentary on the bottom of this YouTube show, or reach me at Facebook, and I will respond in kind.
There you go. Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Steven. Appreciate it. And thank you again, Logan, for all that you did. I'm Harper LeBel saying thank you for tuning in to Take 5 with Steven Travers. We hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your day.